Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So imagine typing a command to trigger a series of tasks to build out your WVD infrastructure. Today, I'm going to show you how it can be done with Terraform. Hello and welcome everyone to my session on deploying WVD with Terraform. I hope everyone like me has been enjoying WVD Tech Fest 2021, and I would like to thank Patrick and Simon for organizing this great event and allowing me to share with you all. My name is Jen Sheerin, and I've been working decades in infrastructure. I am not a developer. Earlier in my career, when things were much smaller, it was easy to do next, finish a couple of times, and the job is done. It was about 8 years or so when I realized that wasn't going to work anymore. It was right around that time the word agile started being used a lot. And lucky for me, I had already been using some scripting, mostly PowerShell, to do what I needed. At the time, I worked for a company that chose to use Ansible, and somehow I managed to avoid getting involved with that and sticking with PowerShell because there's only so many hours in the day, and my focus was at the time on Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop and Citrix ADC, formerly called NetScaler. So I had the mindset that infrastructure as code was essential, but I didn't find a tool I liked until I discovered Terraform. And before I share with you more about Terraform, briefly about me, you can see some of my community involvements here. I'm a Microsoft MVP awarded in Enterprise Mobility and a new Citrix Technology Professional. I am the US Windows Virtual Desktop User Group founder, and everyone's welcome to attend the monthly meetups. I am a Citrix User Group Community Woman in Tech Mentor, and yep, I'm wearing a shirt too, and one of the Citrix User Group Community Tampa Bay leaders. I work as a post-sales senior delivery engineer, focusing on end-user computing, especially Microsoft WVD, Citrix virtualization, and Citrix networking. So as a delivery engineer, easy to use, repeatable, less manual intervention, version control code on infrastructure, and trackable are all very valuable. You may be wondering why I use Terraform. Well, especially since Project Bicep is easier to use from what we saw earlier today than ARM. For me, I also like the multi-platform and cloud agnostic benefits of Terraform. So let's not forget to thank our great sponsors that helped to make this event possible. So remember to thank them all. And first, we'll need to do some level setting with some of the basics of Terraform. I'll go over what you need to get started. Then I'll show you my methods for deploying WVD, including the supporting infrastructure. And along the way, I'll highlight some of the key points. There are demos, yes. So as I talk about the basics, for those of you that already know Terraform, please be patient. Terraform is an open source templating language created by HashiCorp. The initial release was in 2014, and the current version today is 0.14.7. Some of you may have already heard of HashiCorp if you're familiar with Packer, which is another HashiCorp product. As a matter of fact, Azure Image Builder is built on Packer. So when I started learning Terraform, I found a wealth of information and tutorials on the Terraform website. It's terraform.io. And I highly suggest taking a look if you want to learn more. There's some great tutorials there. Helped me out a lot. So according to the website, Terraform is a tool for building, changing, and versioning infrastructure safely and efficiently. So it's a tool that can be used for provisioning. It is not used for configuration of infrastructure. So what does that mean? If I were using scripting for deployment, I must script what I want and the how or directions and the order, and also scripting to configure it. In Terraform, I define what I want in the HCL language, and Terraform takes care of the how to produce the desired state. Cool, right? I think so. How does this work? In part, there is something called providers. The provider is responsible for understanding the API and interaction with the resources. So as you can see here, there is an Azure provider along with several other vendors. So a few months ago, this desktop virtualization resources were added to the Azure RM Terraform provider. And all of us in the WVD community, including me, was really excited because that meant that we could use Terraform to deploy WVD. So you can click on the link from the list of providers on the Terraform website I just showed you, or you can go directly to the GitHub URL to get the example files for your project. So the example files are as what you see on the screen, and you can just copy those and manipulate those as you need them. Before we dive in a bit further, just bear with me. You should know that Terraform has a state file. When you use Terraform to deploy infrastructure, it stores information in a file with the extension of .tfstate, which is a JSON file. It contains information on what Terraform has deployed and is used for future deployments to apply changes incrementally. So on the screen is my example from the state file for the deployment I did for this session. But you should know that Terraform state can include sensitive information. By default, Terraform state is stored locally. However, locally is not working well if you're collaborating with a team, and you should store Terraform in a common area. You have options. One option is to store Terraform state in Azure storage. You can probably do blog. Another is to store Terraform state in Terraform Cloud. For this demo, I use the default for simplicity, but it's not the best practice. So please don't use a local. Okay, so having a little mouse challenges here. Bear with me. Okay. So when I first started doing Terraform, I found versioning a bit confusing, and I had some errors. If you look at this Terraform block, let's see if I can get my pointer to work. Here we go. So if you look at this Terraform block here, you can see that I set this required version to be greater than or equal to 0.14.0, which is the Terraform version. Then down here, for the required providers, I'm setting the version to 2.47.0, which is the Azure provider. So it says Azure RM. Now, I did this on purpose so we can take a look at what happened. So I'm gonna just play the demo here and let's see. So let's see what happens when I initialize, right? And we'll have to scroll up a little bit so we can take a look. So here you can see that I get a warning message about the expression being deprecated, and down below I have an error message saying that it's unsupported version. So all of my code was written in 0.13.5. So when I tried to upgrade and put in the required version, bang, I got an error, right? And Terraform's really good. It gives me feedback on how to resolve the error if you read the notes. So pay attention to those messages when you see them. Let's see if I can get rid of this laser pointer here. Okay. All right. So you saw me earlier run the Terraform init command. So before I can run other commands, I must run Terraform init to initialize the working directory. And we'll talk more about these in a minute. Running Terraform plan will show my changes, and then after reviewing the changes, I can run Terraform apply to make changes. And since this is my lab, when I'm ready to start all over again, I run Terraform destroy to remove everything. And of course, I had to have a cool graphic too with the DevOps. So let's go over what we need to get started really quickly. So to start using my Windows machine with Terraform, I need to go to the Terraform website and download the exe. The zip file is just one terraform.exe file, and I need to make sure that I put in my system variable path, the location, so I can make sure I use it in other folders. And don't worry if you're on Mac, Linux, Solaris, etc. There is a version for downloading there too as well. Then not required, but I like to use Visual Studio Code. I think you've seen everybody today using pretty much a lot of Visual Studio Code as well. It's free, it works really well, and there are Terraform extensions here. These are the two of my favorites that I use, and I can get the IntelliSense, so it makes it really easy. Let's see. All right, so we have another demo coming up here. So let's first talk about, I want to get back to my laser pointer one second. It's a laser pointer. So before we move on, I want to show you one thing about running Terraform init. When I ran initialize, so I ran initialize here, this folder is a hidden folder. It's .terraform. This directory gets created, and it's used to cache all the provider plugins and things. So all the stuff that you see here is stored in that directory. Terraform reads files that have .tf. So here you have the .tf files that you see here, and it also reads the .tf vars. So typically, the file structure is the main.tf, and you could put everything in that one file. You don't have to break it out. But obviously, it makes more sense for me to break it out if I'm going to reuse this code multiple times, right? So what I did was the providers.tf has all the information that had my required versioning. The outputs is just as it says, outputs. And then the Terraform.tf vars is used with the variables.tf. So the variables.tf is where I define my variables, and then I could use that same variables.tf to set the default options on the variable and then input it there. But I don't want to do that because I would just want to have one file to change. So if I wanted to use this in a dev and staging, I could copy the code and just change the Terraform.vars to change my variables and names and things like that. So I end up putting all my my changes in the Terraform.tf vars for my variables. So that way I can easily swap things out. Okay, up here you can see that I have a modules folder, and I'm using modules for collection of reusable files. Since we initialized this directory, Terraform will read everything in that directory, including the subfolders. So I don't need to worry about breaking things out. It will just know that everything is in there. So as you see here, right, when I ran the Terraform init, the modules show you have the AD. Inside this modules folders, I have an AD folder, and I have modules, Active Directory. I have another subfolder for domain. So I had to build an Azure Active Directory domain controller in my lab, and so that's why you're seeing that. And then I have a module for the shared image gallery. I also have this module for storage account that I'll have to build for our FSIX profiles and MSIX app attach, and then of course the WVD module, right? So here you see when we initialized, went in the backend, and then also it looked for the version, and I have this version called random here. What this is, I didn't specify this, but Terraform knows that I need this random because when I created the storage syntax for the storage account, I use a parameter called random string and to randomize my storage name because I wanted to get the unique name. So Terraform picked up when I initialized that it needs to grab that random plugin to make sure I can use the random string. So since I didn't have it, it went ahead and installed it for me. And so you can see here it installed, and I have the random and also the Azure RM. So everything's okay, message is successful, and I am good to go. All right, so let's play this. If you remember from the previous graphic, if the next thing I need to do after I initialize is I need to run Terraform plan. So immediately here, you'll notice that there is this Terraform lock file that got created. That's for my Terraform state. Pointer is having problems. So we'll need to scroll up here just to have a look at the top. So let's start at the top. There's a lot of stuff here because I'm doing it all at once, the whole entire components in addition to WVD. So it's kind of going along with the whole order thing here. So you can see here that, and I want to stop my video for a second. I apologize. The pointer is not happy with my video. So just fast forward that a little bit. To where we were. Okay, so I want to pause it here so we can talk about this. So if you notice here, this is the format for the code, and I'll show it to you in a little bit, but I wanted to stop and talk about it here because it's a good way to see everything. So we have a resource, and this resource type is the Azure RM _ resource group, which is dictated by the provider. So Azure provider determines what name that you put in here. This name of example, as you can see, it was just random. It can be anything because this is only used by Terraform. And then down below, you have an ID. And the ID, the resource ID, is a combination of both the Azure resource group plus the example. You may need to know that sometimes. In this case, it probably doesn't matter, but you sometimes will have to refer to a resource that needs an ID, and how you would enter it in would be Azure RM.resource_group.example, right? You don't need to actually put in the value. So here we know that the value is not, you'll see a lot of not known after apply because we haven't created anything yet. This is just a plan. So we're just reviewing what's going to be created. Down here, you see that the location is equal to East US. This is my region in Azure, the location that the resource will be created. And here, the name is the resource group name. So this will actually be the actual name of the Azure resources. When I look in the portal, I will see my resource group with WVD-RG. So let's keep going here, and I'll talk while the video is going through. So you can see that there's a little green plus sign next to all the resources, indicating that these things are going to be added or created, right? And you can see I'm adding the shared image gallery here. So at shared image gallery, it found the name and the location from the variable. And I'm also using tags here. I put in a tag. And then you notice that there's the unique name. And if we look for the Azure storage, so here's a storage account. This is the one that has a lot of requirements for the size, and that was using the random also. And I didn't define most of this, right? The resource provider already knows it wasn't required, so it just adds it automatically. And here's the shared the file shares for FSLogix and MSIX. And I didn't even set the quota. This was the default quota, the 5120, if you notice. And here's my random string where I'm creating that 4-character string so I can name my resource. And all of this is ordered on its own. I didn't set this order. So here's the WVD stuff. So it has the application group and then the host pool. And here we have the breadth first, and it's a pooled of type. And then here's where it happens, the association happens, where it creates the association for the desktop application group. And these here is my Azure Active Directory domain controller. Notice I'm calling PowerShell to do some configuration for me because I need, remember Terraform doesn't do any scripting, any configuration for you. It's just deploying out the infrastructure. So I also built a member server. So I have the domain controller and a member server. So that's why you're seeing so many of these going in, because I needed a jump box to get in. And you can see all the network is happening to the space, and there are 26 items to add. Okay, so that was a lot. I probably need a little mental break right now. Let's see. So let's take a look at what I initiated to call that. So this is my main.tf. From, if you remember the few slides back, I had the file structure. Main.tf, here I just defined the Azure RM, but the provider.tf referenced the versions, the required versions. And this type is new. So before we were seeing the resources, but this one is a module. So this is saying the module of AD goes out, and I have a source, which is module, my module subfolder, but I could put in a path here, a GitHub URL or something else. It doesn't have to be a local subfolder, right? So you could see how you can easily use shared resources if you just needed to call something. Like in this case, normally probably would not need AD. It was just because of my lab. So it's same thing with the storage account here. You can see that I called the variable var.location is the format, so it's var.the name. Same thing here with the admin user and the admin password, and all these were defined in the terraform.tf vars file. So I had what actually needed to go in there. So I had some prefixes. I set them on purpose for you to see here that I use different ones, but you could variable those too as well. And towards the end of this, I'll talk a little bit more about Packer, but I added a section here in when I was testing out the Packer. So there's a resource group here for Packer. So now that we have this foundation and we know what we're planning to deploy, you should know what's coming next, right? So our next step is to run Terraform apply. So you just type out Terraform apply and we're off and running. And down at the bottom here, I'm prompted to enter yes. So I don't have to do it this way. I can enter a switch, which is -- auto approve. And that will let me automatically run the auto approve. If I want to do automation, I don't have to answer yes, right? I just wanted you to see this. And so I sped up the video so we can fast forward. It took all of 20 minutes. And now if you look in the portal, you can see there's my storage account. And I have 2 file shares here. And if we go up to look at Windows Virtual Desktop, you can see that I created a host pool. Here's our host pool. And under application groups, you can see that we have our desktop application group. And there's our workspace. And remember that I also did a shared image gallery. So if we look at the shared image gallery, there's our gallery that got created. And an image definition, and it has all the publisher, offer, the SKU, and the operating system. Everything's all filled out already for us. So the cool thing about that is it took 20 minutes, including the Active Directory. And honestly, the Active Directory part took a lot longer than the rest of the stuff. So the next time I do it without it, I'll have to get back to you if you want to know how long it takes without the AD. So I'll just go here back. So I didn't have so in when I initially took the video, I didn't have the log analytics set up, but I went back and I added that later. So when you see here, I destroyed everything, and it was 32 destroyed, even though I built 26 because I actually had a gap in my video. So you just bear with me on that one here. But if you notice that the destroy took 47 seconds. So this, you will see there's red that says that you are destroying the items, and you have little red negative signs letting you know that this is going to be minus from your environment. So you really want to be careful when you're doing destroy, because it wipes out everything. So I would say stop, read the messages, make sure you take a look before you do this destroy. All right, so here's the part about Packer. So if you notice, I didn't have a session host. After the build was completed, that's because I didn't build an image from the shared image gallery to create the VM to use Packer. For that, I had to use Packer, right? There is no tool in Terraform that I can use to build out. I can build out a VM, absolutely, but I couldn't figure out how to build out a VM and put it in the shared image gallery. So I had to use Packer, and it took 40 minutes to build the image once I used Packer. I wanted to use Packer so I can understand how it works. And once I created the image, then I was able to create the session host and add it to my host pool, right? And it worked perfectly fine. So I talked a lot about a lot of stuff, and I know it's at the end of the day, and at least for the European folks, and this is sort of dry. So let's start summarizing, and I'll highlight back again some of the key points. So we talked about the state file and how you should be mindful of that. That is something to look at if you're comparing other tools, right? Because a state file it lets you know that you had those items. When I ran the Terraform destroy, the state file allows, keeps track of those things so that I know that it knows that these are the items that's going to be destroyed, right? So it keeps that sync. We went through the basic commands, so there's more than just init, plan, apply, and destroy. I only gave you the 4 main ones for what I needed to do to show you the demos here today. It's all you need to do, WVD, but if you're getting deeper into Terraform, there's certainly a lot more. So we talked about the file structure, and I just wanted to highlight this again. So there is the variables file that contains all our variables, and you want to make sure that you're following a good file structure so that you can reuse your code and share it. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You want to make sure that you can be repeatable along with some other benefits. So main is the typical name, but it doesn't have to be main. But if you don't use the main name, then when you run the Terraform commands, you actually have to call the file. So that's just a drawback. And if you're probably doing automation, then you need to figure that out, and that becomes another thing, right? So notice I have the modules broken out here. I don't think I had it in the previous screen. So there's the AD module, and I can certainly use that in other places in addition to my network. So the network was just a VNet and a subnet and the shared image gallery, storage, and I also had the virtual machine to spin up the VM. So I did spin up a VM from that image to validate that it was working, but the whole point of making WVD work is to add it to make it a session host. So I didn't do it throughout the demo. And notice I have this files.tf, so you can name files, whatever, just long as it's tf to figure out what you're doing if you're doing some advanced stuff. So here is what the variables tf file looks like. It's very simple. This is the format. If I were using the default option to put the variable, the actual value in here, I would just add a line that says default option equal and then my prefix value, or for example, the location is probably easier. Default value equal East US. But I didn't, like I said, I didn't want to put that into the variables file because I want to reuse the variables and just change one file, which is the terraform.tf vars file. The other thing is when you go to the GitHub repository for Azure RM, the example files also include the variables. So you would get this, you can copy that and use this as a guide when you're making your blocks. Okay, so we talked about resources. So I showed you about the resource block and how that works, and the type and the name gives you the resource ID. And here I use it as a reference. So when I created the WVD workspace, I needed to put it in the resource group. I wanted to reuse the resource group that I created earlier up here. So I use the syntax is Azure RM _ resource _ group dot the name, this name here, the Terraform uses to reference, and then dot name calls this value here. So when this translates back into when the plan runs and the apply runs, it will know that I'm actually using this value right here, RG _ WVD. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, and so the big one was I deployed WVD with supporting components in 20 minutes. So now I have time to relax, right? I can zen out. I talked about using Packer to build the image, and I love learning, and I wanted to understand Packer so I could compare it to Azure Image Builder. It helps with deciding which solution is best for each use case, because not to give the consultant answer, but it depends, right? Well, that's true. It really is. I mean, there's no one size fit all. So the more I know as a delivery engineer, the better I can guide my customer on the right decision. And also, I found that learning at the foundation helps me to understand better as I add the layers on top of it. So Azure Image Builder is my next hop, but I already feel comfortable with Packer. I'm certainly still learning, but I can feel like. So what's next for me? That brings me up to this. I wanted to use Manage Identity. I was actually inspired by Jim and his YouTube channel for a lot of this. And the Manage Identity has this whole chicken before the egg thing when you're using Terraform and I think some other tools. And so I wasn't able to get that working just yet. So that's on my list of to-dos to make that work. But I also want to integrate Terraform into Azure DevOps, which to me makes more sense. It makes Terraform more powerful, and I can automate that with integration. So that's the direction I was going when I wrote the slide. But after today and watching some of the earlier sessions, I'm now excited to try out Bicep and to do GitHub Actions. And you can use GitHub Actions with Terraform too. So I'll be phoning a couple of friends, I think, so we can collaborate. So that's what's next for me. So I want to say thank you for listening to me and to let me talk to you about Terraform today. As a gift, I have put all my code that I use to build out the infrastructure, with the exception of the submodules for AD, on my GitHub. So feel free to grab it and start working on your own project. Hopefully I've inspired you to do a little Terraform, at least try it out. I ran into some problems with GitHub on the subtrees and didn't have time to fix my repo yet. So I'm working on getting all the AD modules. So in the modules, the AD section has some of the files missing in the submodules. And as always, you can reach out to me via social, that's here, and the GitHub URL is there as well. And I would love to have feedback. Please fill out the evaluations. Thank you all for attending. And a special thank you to Simon and Patrick for organizing the WVD Tech Fest 2021. I know that it's a lot of effort to do just a presentation. I couldn't imagine the work that they had to do to put this together and still have day jobs. So thank you all, and everyone out there, please remember to thank them and our partners.
Thank you so much, Jen, for your session, for everything. It was an honor to have all of you today, the attendees, the speakers, the sponsors for our TechFest today. That was actually the last session. It was a very, very good one. Thank you very much for presenting.
Thank you for having me. It was my honor.
Perfect. I have two questions actually for you, Jen.
Okay.
What do you recommend as a good starting point for learning Terraform? Do you have some recommendations to share?
Yeah, so the first place I started was with the Terraform website, terraform.io. And they had some really cool videos and tutorials. And I got a little annoyed sometimes when there was a little more AWS than Azure, because I'm focusing on Azure. Not that I have a problem with AWS, it's just that I don't have enough bandwidth in my day to learn everything, and so I had to narrow down my focus. And there, if you follow along, there's some Azure sections, so there's some good videos there. And in addition to the YouTube site for HashiCorp also has some good sessions, that breakout sessions from the past, and they actually just had recently an event, and there's some sessions, new sessions that will be posted. So the information that I have on the code that I showed you, I wrote in the new syntax. The new syntax meaning the .13.5 syntax. The syntax before that was actually had the curly braces, the $ curly braces. That was very similar to what Frank showed us in the biceps. I noticed that when I was watching his session that it had the curly braces and the $ as well. So that's something to be mindful of when you're doing the versioning. But check out the website, the YouTube videos, and there's also some good community leaders in the Terraform world. So I'd be happy to send out links if anyone wants to reach out to me. And then there are a couple of books as well. I can get titles for you.
Perfect. That sounds great. And maybe that would answer the second question I can see here. Is there a link to a repository we can have a look at? Do you have something to share here, or maybe a good book recommendation or something?
Yeah, so the GitHub repository for the Terraform provider, let me see if I could put this in the chat. How do I do this? Okay, I might have replied privately, I'm not sure. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that now.
Yeah, it should be visible.
Yeah, so that is the Terraform provider, and actually on my GitHub, I also had some links. So I had links for everything that you need in this to reproduce this session, like create your own lab. I had the links. I even had the links for Visual Studio Code because I just love using that. But I have the links there for you to follow along and go grab the Terraform provider. And if you look at that folder structure, it's a little bit overwhelming at first, but just look at the examples folder. And WVD is known as desktop virtualization. So when you look at you're looking for the WVD section, you want to look for desktop virtualization folder.
Perfect. And Jen, you got some feedback here in the chat.
Oh, let me look.
Do you want to read it?
Thank you, Maran.
It was a great session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was a great event, and really, really happy to participate.
Perfect. And maybe you get the chance quite soon again. We saw that there was such a huge interest in the registrations, so that we decided to make a second event still this year. And as you can see here, that goes out to all attendees. We will do the second edition on the 18th of November this year.
Oh, great. I'll block it off. If you'll have me.
Oh, sure. Okay, there's still a bit of time left, exactly 60 minutes. So if you want to raise any question, most of the speakers are still here. Please feel free to raise them. This is your chance.